welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now is Lt.Col Robert Brown. He's a former Green Beret and founder of Soldier of Fortune magazine. He's got a new book out called I Am Soldier of Fortune, Dancing with Devils. Well, we're very happy you could join us. You, of course, have had a very interesting military career and perhaps an even more interesting career as a journalist with your magazine. But which portion of your career has given you more personal satisfaction?
Well, there's no question. My time as a Green Beret team leader in Vietnam was the most challenging position and opportunity that I've ever had in my life. And as I've said over the years, I don't claim to have been the best, but it certainly was the most challenging position in the respect that I was responsible for the lives of about 1,000 people, including 576 mercenary tribesmen fighting the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. I was the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Minister of Housing, and it was, as I said, an incredible adrenaline rush as well as an incredible challenge, and very, very satisfying. Nothing has ever matched that, and I don't expect at this point in time it ever will.
Well, you were kicked out of the Special Forces 2 times. You write about this in your book, but tell us about how that, in your independent spirit, helped guide your very unique career path.
Well, I got involved in a lot of controversial stuff, if you will, at a very early age in my career, and I suppose the most prominent thing being is I was an initial supporter of Fidel Castro when he was considered by most people, including most political pundits, as a liberal social democrat. Once that gets on your record, why, then that follows you, as far as the government is concerned, wherever you go. So even though I ended up opposing Castro within a year, the military does not like people that are out of the ordinary, and I certainly was out of the ordinary. So that's why I got booted out the first time. And when I got back over to Vietnam, I was able to pull some strings and get back in Special Forces without them knowing that I'd been kicked out in the States, and when they found that out, why they essentially kicked me out the second time. So that's the way life goes, but they couldn't do much about it because they had failed to update my security clearance, and the colonel at the Pentagon told me that they made a bad mistake, so they went ahead and sent me to Vietnam.
And at one point in the book, I remember reading that your team of journalists also created the news that they were reporting on. Now, that idea basically goes against everything they teach you in journalism school, not that that's necessarily a bad thing. But did that ever cause you any issues when yourself or your team would run up against journalists from the media establishment?
Well, we weren't appreciated by mainstream journalists, in fact, any journalists for the most part. There were exceptions to the rule that some journalists did appreciate what we were doing and the quality of journalism we were coming up with, but certainly the fact that we were involved in training various and sundry groups. The one that comes to mind, of course, is the Contras in Central America and also in El Salvador. And most journalists took exception to the fact that we carried guns everywhere we went, and if we get fired upon, we fired back. That being said, we really didn't give a hoot what the other journalists said, and needless to say, none of them ever wanted to challenge us physically.
In the beginning of the book, you mentioned former Navy SEAL Lt.Col. I had the chance to interview him before he was shot and killed by a former soldier at a gun range suffering from PTSD. Lt.Col was a great guy, very well liked, but he also told you that Soldier of Fortune magazine was what inspired him to join the military. You also say that's one of your proudest accomplishments about your publication. Why do you feel like military service is so important for some young men?
Well, let me digress slightly and say that's one of the great accomplishments or satisfactions I've had in being involved in Soldier of Fortune magazine over the years, actually 38 years now. And that is, I've had innumerable military personnel come to me and say they were motivated to join the military because of reading Soldier of Fortune magazine. I think it can best be summed up by, and I'm paraphrasing now, Frederick Forsyth, who said there's something to the effect that there are some men that are born to the priesthood. Well, there are some men born to be warriors. I think that's just cannot be explained any better than that. And gives me, once again, great pleasure that I've had influence, if you will, in some of these people joining the military. And Chris Kyle said in the book that I have that SOF was pretty much responsible for him joining the military.
I also want to focus on the time you spent in Afghanistan during the 1980s fighting Soviets. You fought alongside the Mujahideen there. What's your take on the current situation in Afghanistan today?
Well, the first thing is that the bozo in the White House has to get his head out of a dark place and realize that we're still involved in a global war on terror, which has certainly not gone away, and quite the contrary, appears to be spreading. I think the best example of the stupidity of the administration is trying to characterize this shooting down at Fort Hood as being a case of workplace violence. The guy on trial now has come out and admitted that he's essentially a terrorist, and he's an Islamic fundamentalist. That's not workplace violence. That's plain old terrorism. And we're just not realizing the fact that the challenges are even increasing throughout Africa and the Middle East, and Syria has turned into an incredible mess. I don't know what we're going to do out of that. I can't make any recommendations, although I can say without qualification that the administration certainly is not addressing it efficiently and effectively. And we've got a fight on our hands for a long, long time in the future.
Well, that part of the world is known as the graveyard of empires. You know, whether it's this administration, which you clearly don't like what they're doing in terms of foreign policy, or the next administration, is there anything that a foreign military like the United States can do for long-term success in Afghanistan?
Well, tragically, I think it's a classic case of declaring we won the war and leaving. We haven't won the war. I have no solutions for it. The point is we are facing a dreadful situation that in the respect that the Afghan army that we have created is so dependent upon us for logistics, for air support, for medevacs, etc., that when we finally pull out, there's no way that they're going to be prepared to handle the terrorist problem. And furthermore, it's exacerbated by a problem we have not been able to solve, and that is that you have Pakistan serving as a conduit and a safe area for the terrorists. I don't know what's going to happen over there, but all I can say is it's not going to be good.
Now, you've also spent a lot of time in Africa, and to a certain degree, we see history repeating itself based on what you saw in North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and places like Yemen. Lawless tribes and factions, radical Islamists attacking governments and civilians, as well as U.S. interests. What is it going to take to stop the spread of radical militants?
Well, we're just going to have to have our eyes focused and keep our focus on the situation over there and respond to the various terrorist threats as they occur. Once again, I have no magical solution, but the point is the threat is there, and we certainly aren't going to solve the problem or even deal with it by ignoring it. And that's what it appears is happening on the part of the administration at the present time. But we have to make commitments with money and guns. We're not doing that very successfully. Once again, for instance, Syria, I have no recommendations. It's an incredibly difficult place, and this is spreading, of course, into Africa. Where it's going to stop, we don't know at this point in time. But we must stay engaged, and we must provide support to those regimes that are not terrorist controlled or tend to be terrorist controlled. So as I said earlier, it's a ball game that's going to last more than 9 innings. Factually looking at it, that's going to continue to occur for the foreseeable future. And I'm not talking about months or years, I'm talking about decades.
You know, one thing that has changed is now there's been this increased use of drone strikes, especially recently in Yemen. I wanted to get your take on these drone strikes and whether or not you think they can be successful.
Well, there's two sides to that coin too. Certainly it's an effective method of taking out targets that are considered to be threats. And frankly, it's no different as far as targeting a specific individual than what we did, for instance, in World War II. A classic example is when we intercepted Japanese codes concerning, or transmissions concerning the air movement of General Admiral Yamamoto, and we sent a squadron of P-38s, which shot down his plane and killed him. Well, you're doing the same thing with drone strikes, although unfortunately there are civilian casualties, collateral damage. But you know, I go back to World War II and say, well, when we decided we wanted to take out a significant aspect of Hitler's war production, we'd go in and bomb Frankfurt, and it caused 100,000 casualties in one night. I hate to see civilians injured or even killed in the conjunction with these drone strikes, but we've got to deal with these people, and sometimes, unfortunately, there is collateral damage. Nothing like the collateral damage in World War II in Europe or in Japan.
Now, while I was reading your book, I kept thinking about Ernest Hemingway's book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. The protagonist, American Robert Jordan, runs off to Spain to fight in a civil war there in the 1930s. You and your colleagues have obviously taken that idea to a whole new level. And now today there are stories of Americans who have run off to join the fight in Libya a while back. But my question, I guess, is the idea of a soldier of fortune. Is it still alive and well today?
Well, to a much less degree than it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We did stuff back in the 80s that would never be allowed to do by the American government at this point in time. One of the examples probably being that's most prominent is our work with the Salvadorian Army for over a period of several years, at which point in time we carried our own guns onto Army bases. We had get out of jail free cards. We could arrest people on the streets. And of course the MIL groups, the U.S. military group down there, knew what we were doing, but they just couldn't do much about it because we were, if you wanted to put it, so let's see, not much you could do about it because the Salvadorian Army wanted us there and we were making a valuable contribution, since the people that we had down there were all combat veterans, sometimes 2, 3, 4 tours of Vietnam. So there is some opportunities. The one that comes to mind, of course, is there are a number of Americans that are veterans with combat experience that are over supporting the Koreans, an ethnic minority in Burma that's fighting the Burmese dictatorship. There are, of course, a number of ethnic minorities over there, and Americans have shown up over there, as well as ex-French Foreign Legionnaires and people from Australia and Britain, etc. But it's nothing compared to what it was back in the previous decade. So there's certainly not much of an opportunity, although one could make the observation that soldiers of fortune, quote, close quote, have morphed into contractors like Blackwater, etc., in which people employ their military skills. And once again, it depends how you want to describe soldier of fortune. Somebody that works for profit in a dangerous situation, well, that certainly would apply to contractors. So it's not like it used to be, but on the same token, it'll do.
An important distinction you mentioned there with I guess the corporate entities that now employ these soldier of fortunes like Blackwater. Things have changed certainly, but you know, fascinating to learn about it in your book. The new book is called I Am Soldier of Fortune. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Brown, a pleasure talking with you, sir, and thank you for watching Newsmax TV.